Hi, this is Carl from Linguagenesis, and what I want to talk about in this video, which is the first of two parts, is the aspect of the topic of double negatives in the Spanish language. Now, for those of you who have been studying Spanish for a number of years now, and especially those of you who are currently studying it at A level, you will no doubt have come across numerous examples of double negatives in the Spanish language. Now, what I have here in front of me is an A5 sheet of paper on which I've made a note of a total of 30 examples of double negatives in the Spanish language. Some of them, in fact, contain treble or quadruple negatives, and some are arguably more complicated in terms of the sentence structures than others. But before we actually go on to consider some of these examples, what I want to do first of all is to define what is meant by a double negative. Now, as far as the English language is concerned and also the Spanish language is concerned, many of the negative words begin with N. And if we take a couple of examples, we have, for example, not, and we also have nobody. Adding to that list, we have words such as nobody, and nowhere, and neither, and no, and so forth. Now, as far as the English language is concerned, double negatives, especially in written communications, would be regarded as grammatically incorrect. But where the spoken language is concerned, and especially for me as a speaker of a dialect, in my case the Yorkshire dialect, double negatives would arguably be heard and wouldn't be regarded amongst the people from Yorkshire, and especially the broadest speakers of the Yorkshire dialect, they wouldn't be regarded as being incorrect. But we have to bear in mind that double negatives in English are regarded as wrong. Whereas in Spanish, they're quite common, frequently occurring, and crop up all the time in written communications and also where the verbal language is concerned. Now, if we take an example of a double negative in English, we will find, as I've just said, that it will be grammatically incorrect. And one example which springs to mind and actually features the treble negative is the commonly occurring sentence within my hometown of Barnsley: I don't want nothing to do with nobody. Now, we know that in standard English that must read, I don't want anything to do with anybody. So in standard English, which is the correct version, I don't want anything to do with anybody, we have just the one negative, and the one negative is required as opposed to the double or the treble negative. I don't, that's the first negative and the only negative, want anything positive to do with anybody, positive. Now, if we translate that example into Spanish, then we must consistently use the negative where any positive word occurs. So the literal translation would be the one which I might say, or I might hear spoken by somebody from my hometown of Barnsley. In other words, I don't want nothing to do with nobody. The first negative is don't, do not. The second negative is nothing, and the third negative is nobody. So let's do a literal translation into Spanish of that, and we will find, as I say, that it is grammatically correct. No quiero, first negative. Tener nada, second negative. Que ver con nadie, that's the third negative. Now, if I just refer to my list, I will pick another example, and I'll try to pick one of the easier ones. Let's take this one. We haven't seen him with anybody. Now, because it contains in English not, or have not, haven't, we must use no, and then the no is generally the indicator of the fact that a double negative has to be used. So we'll start with no, and then when we come to say anybody, we will translate that word as nobody. So here it is. We haven't seen him with anybody. No lo hemos visto con nadie. We have not seen him with nobody. So that concludes part one, and I will continue this discussion in part two, drawing up more examples, and hopefully through discussion of these examples we'll be able to clarify a lot more how we construct double negatives in Spanish. And then if you have a pen to hand and you can make down a note of the examples as we go through them, then obviously as a visual reference that will help to aid your understanding a lot better.